Thanks so much, Andrew, for the introduction, and thank you both Andrew and Anki for having Chris and I and Concentrix Tigerspike today at the talk. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me. Is everyone able to see that?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yes, so thank you guys for having us this evening. We're really excited to tell you a bit more about Tigerspike and show how amazing Chris is at what he does. And if anyone is keen to join us, please feel free to reach out to myself at the end as well. So yeah, I'd love to just start off by telling you a bit more about Tigerspike, who we are, what we do, clients we have, our culture, all things Tigerspike. So just as a bit of background around the company, so we're a digital agency. We specialize in consulting, digital transformation, service delivery. Our core focus is around building mobile apps in the iOS and Android space, and we also do some web things as well. So we've been around for about 18 years now, and recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, we were acquired by a larger company called Concentrix. So that's the name change. We're Concentrix Tigerspike now, but that's allowed us to grow so much over the last few years and everything. And we have clients coming out of our ears at the moment. There's non-stop work and everyone's always busy, which is great. And we have offices all around the world, and of course Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney, and we're also Singapore, Dubai, Tokyo, New York, London. So that's something that drew me to the company, because I'm Irish obviously, so the chance to travel to elsewhere in the world and work in a company like that is something cool. But in terms of what we do, we're completely agile. There's multidisciplinary teams you'd be working across, with engineers, designers, PMs, BAs, the whole shebang. But I'll let Chris talk more around the tech side of things, as it's definitely not my expertise. So some of our current clients that we have, we work with 7-Eleven on their fuel app. We have Virgin Airlines on their frequent flyer member program. We have some fun projects like Guzman and Gomez, the burrito bar, which is cool. And then we have some government clients as well, like QPS here in Brisbane, and then Transport for New South Wales and Opal down in Sydney. So there's always lots going on, lots of variety, never a dull day in Tigerspike. To get all these projects across, we partner with the best in the tech space. So we have Apple, AWS, Microsoft, and Telstra. That ensures us that we can provide our clients with the best services and give them the best we can when we're developing apps and working on all that. So this is my favorite bit about Tigerspike, is the people. That's one of the main things that drew me to the company myself. So there's always things going on at the end of a project, say with QPS here, Queensland Police Services. The guys went out for lunch and bowling. There's Thursday lunches at the hub, which I loved. When I first joined, I was like, I was messaging my boss in Sydney saying, I'm not getting much work done. I'm doing too much talking, chatting to the team. It's more of a fun day out, which is really nice, catching up. Everyone's so lovely. So there's a small team of about 28 here in Brisbane, and we're growing pretty fast at the moment. Then we are all food enthusiasts. So here's a picture of Miranda, who loves bringing avocados in from her avocado tree, and Adam always brings in donuts for the team, so it's always a bit of fun as well if you're loving food. And then another thing that's obviously very important, especially over the last year or two, obviously we're worried that people work from home and homeschooling and the difficulties around that. So there's a Parents of Tigerspike group. So I know Ella is a big advocate for this, and she has little like drawings for kids and just catch up with we call them cubs in Tigerspike. So they all catch up and have a chat and have a bit of a laugh outside of work as well, which is nice. Also love a bit of twinning, especially in the Star Wars space. Any Marvel fans, any of that? Always love to see that. This is my one and only favorite group on the Slack channel. It's Asian Pets. So it's where Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and Singapore all share their dogs and cats and any other animals you have when you work from home. So at the top, you can see me being mauled by a dog. And then we have another, this is Puss and Tony. There's lots going on, and celebrate dog birthdays and have a dog friendly office and all that. So that's one of my highlights of working here, I have to say. And another thing that Tigerspike really focus in on is the personal and professional budget to grow. So there's a probationary period of 4 months, but once that's passed year on year, the company gives a sum of money for personal growth. So you can spend that. Like I'm spending it on cooking because my poor partner does all the cooking every night. And I know I have friends doing it on roller skating, skiing, learning French. There's a lot to choose from, and as well as that, there's the professional growth. So we really love that internal growth within the company. So say you want to become a line manager and study psychology or management, or get a certification for with Apple or iOS or anything like that. The company really supports that, which is nice. So yeah, now for the main show, I'm going to pass over to the one and only Chris Nevin, who has been with the company since 2015. So he's part of the furniture now. He's been to London, Singapore, and now he's with us in Brisbane. So yeah, I'll pass over to him.
Cool. Thanks, Grace. Yeah, so what will I be demonstrating tonight? So I'm going to start with an existing app that I sort of put together for this event. Oh, okay, we lost sharing.
Will I reshare the screen?
Yeah, just for this bit.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to start with an existing app. I'm going to have a look at some problems with it, do some refactoring, and then talk about a framework that we have decided to use at Tigerspike. Okay, you can probably stop now. All right, I'll share mine. Cool. This is going to be in the way a little bit. So hope you guys can see all of that. Can I get a yes or no?
Yeah, all good from
me.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I can't see you guys anymore. So yeah, so I've got this little time zone app. It lets you type in some cities. So like Sydney, for example, you can tick and untick. It adds it to the list, and you can remove some existing ones. So it's showing the time, and that was just so I can demonstrate one of Apple's new features, which is the pull to refresh, which will just update the times. So that's just a little bit of, I don't know, just trying out some of the new stuff that Apple's given us in the new Xcode. So let's have a look at some of the code. So we've got a city service, which is basically just a wrapper around timezone.default timezone identifiers. It just returns a list of identifiers. And I've just mapped them to city objects. So city's just got whether it's our current city, so Brisbane's highlighted, whether we favorited it, which is whether or not it appears in the list. So, you know, like Sydney, Melbourne, whatever. So that's the favoriting. The name, the time, the current time, and the GMT offset. So it's just +10 or whatever. So we've got that. There's a little search function here that sort of is a helper on the cities. So when we're in this list, it's just showing favorites. Otherwise, it's searching on name. Got the city view, which you can see is just this little cell. And that's more or less it. But what you'll notice about this view is we've sort of got a dependency here. We've got some state, we got some cancellables. We have some side effects that are occurring. And there's no easy way to test any of this. And if I wanted to, say, mock the city service, I'm kind of stuck because it's an observable object, which means it has an associated type, which means I would probably have to pass in some sort of generic here, like, I don't know, something conforming to something there, or I would need to put inside another object that conforms to observable, but this one would then be allowed to be a protocol, for example, which sort of limits us when we want to test it. So I know Apple sort of recommends Mvvm now. So I got an example of what that might look like as well. But there's also some sort of shortcomings here where we have this dependency sort of boilerplate that we have to do everywhere. Whenever we want to create a cities view, we have to create the view model, then pass through the services that we need, and it can get very cumbersome. And if you have large teams, like we've got an app with 160 screens plus sort of thing, this can get really tedious. And if you commit things in the wrong order, you'll end up with merge conflicts and things like that, which complicate it further. So we started looking for something that fit a few of our requirements. And if I go back to what we had, so if you look at SwiftUI, it's fairly close to Redux already. We got state. We have some actions as a result of like a button press or whatever, or on a peer, we call another action. We got some side effects down here. So we got the fetch, and then this is asynchronous code. So it all pretty much fits side by side with Redux. So we decided to look for some frameworks that sort of fit that structure, and we ended up with one called composable architecture. I'm not going to demonstrate that tonight, but I do have it in an example project at the end. So what I will do is I will talk over Redux. So I've created a simple store, and I've done this because the composable one is quite a lot more complicated. So I've sort of try to break it down into like the simplest, purest store that I can. So it looks a little bit crazy, but really all you have is state, actions, and dependencies, environment, which is exactly what we have over here. We got dependencies, environment, state, and actions, which are like toggle or fetch. So if I go back to this, we initialize this store object with an initial state, which it stores, hence the name. And it's a publish value. So whenever the store changes, it'll update whatever objects are referring to it. There are some optimizations in composable architecture around this, so it doesn't update for every state change, which are pretty nice. But I digress. So the next thing we have is a reducer. So a reducer takes an action and the current state, and it returns a new state and one or more effects. So an effect in this example is just a publisher of actions. So yeah, you can just stream a bunch of actions. So if you have a API call, for example, you would have maybe a loading started and then a finished or success or error. So you might even have like that mapping to an error action that just shows something on the screen. So down here, we send an action to the reducer with the current state. So we pass the action through and we pass through whatever environment we set up the store with. It passes back a list of actions, a stream of actions. Each one we then send again. And then we store the cancel. In composable architecture, there's actually a way to cancel these cancelables. So you can still, cancel things as you need to, which is pretty nice. There's also this other one, which is like a little helper I wrote, which is similar to the composable architecture. And I'll go into that a little bit later. Finally, there's a binding, which allows us to like get a scope of the state. So if I had, for example, a city, and I wanted to get the name out, I could pass in a key path that gives me that name. And then I could also have an action that sets the name. So without any further ado, I will start setting up a simple cities state, which is pretty much the starting point for this sort of thing. So if we look at a store, we have 3 requirements, right? We have the state, the action, and the environment. So I'll start with those 3. Cities, action, and we also have the environment. So I'm just going to call that one the app environment. And I already know what the app environment is going to contain. It'll just contain the city service. So I'll just put that straight in there. Now, if we're looking at this file, we have some search text. So that's state. So I'm going to start with that and move it up. So the action for that would be when we search. So we've got this searchable in the new iOS 15, which lets us pass in a binding on the strings. So that's a getter and a setter. So what happens when we change it and what happens, where do we get it from? So that leads us to the binding that I created. Oh, sorry, I haven't set up the store. So we need to add a store. I'm just going to use environment object for simplicity over this. So city state, cities action, and app environment. And I'll set one up in our preview. So let's do a net there. You're gonna need a reducer. So I'm gonna set up a really simple empty one. Reducer should be city state, cities, action, and app environment again. And I'm just gonna print whatever action we give it. And I'm gonna return, so it requires a effect, which is just a publisher over an action. So I'm just going to return empty for now and erase. So that's our reducer. And we need an environment. So I'm going to use the app environment. That should be happy. Yep, cool. So now that we've got the store, we can think about how to move the search text in. So, hold on, let me also copy that into the other place we need it. Over here. So we're going to have a search action. So I'm just going to call it search. And it's going to take a string. And then we're going to store it into the state. So we should be able to automatically just replace that because it doesn't really have any ties to anything else here. So I can actually just do search text. And then I can define the action that I want to execute. So it'll be cities action.search. Search. And we also need to replace it here. So all I've done is I've just moved it to a different object. And I'm just referring to that object. And I believe here, search text, and I can delete it from here now. And if I run this, it should still continue working. Once it, there you go. So I should still be able to, right. So our reducer now is not doing anything with the action except printing it. So I need to actually handle this action for it to fill the search text now. So if I switch over that action, search for let text, state.search text equals that. Now if I resume this, it should continue working exactly the same as it used to. Yep, and there we go. So now we've got search going through the store. One of the benefits of this, if I compile, is I can then do everything or anything I want with the actions that are going through. I can log them, I can print them when it runs. Yeah. So you can see everything the user is doing basically. So this is really useful for logging. I'm trying to figure out what went wrong with the application. You can replay it all. And then, yeah, it's one of the benefits of Redux. If you guys have played with like React Native or whatever, or even Swift, one of the other frameworks. So now that I've done that, I'll move on to fetch. So we have this all cities list that we use for the full list that we search. So I'd like to change that so that it comes from the store. So I'm going to move that one up. Sorry, I need to keep it here for now, but I'll just copy it and move it up. And if we look at how it currently works, we've got this function. So it's just fetch cities. It calls the service and it has a fetch method on that. And then we just sync the result. So what I'm going to do is call it the same thing. So fetch. And then it's pretty similar. Like we're just going to call the environment city service fetch. So if you remember, the store is expecting an action to be returned in a publisher. So what we've got here is a list of cities. This one in a publisher. So I need to map it back to an action so that the store knows what to do with it. So we don't have a result yet. So I'll create one. And then we can just map it back. And because it's some crazy type right now, I need to also erase it to any publisher. And instead of calling fetch cities here, we can now just call the store directly, send fetch. And we no longer need this. And we also need to handle the result of fetching. So you might be wondering, why do we have to have an extra action just to store the result? It's because this is an asynchronous call. And what we want is it to all occur on the same thread. So the reducer would typically be all locked to the main thread, which is our UI thread as well, so we can operate on it straight away. It just solves all of those problems we have around, like, dispatch main, async, all that. So I'm going to call this new cities. And we have this all cities, so I'm just going to put it straight into that. New cities. And I believe in order to get this working, I'll need to change this one to state to all cities. And it should function somewhat, but be kind of broken at the same time. Is that running already? I think so. Yeah, so toggling won't work. And I can't pull to refresh anymore because it's all cities, this copy is empty. So I guess I'll move on to filtering. So it's a fairly simple filter. It's already operating only on store.state. So it should just be as simple as just pasting it in here. Filtered cities equals state.allCities, state.search text. So I'm fine for it to be just here rather than in a particular case, because every time I search, it's going to update the filter, and every time I return new cities, we want to also update the filter. So right now it's fine just living here. And I'm just going to create that variable. And we're going to reference it from the store. We can delete this. Cool. And if I rerun that, I type in Sydney, it all just works. So obviously toggling is still broken and refresh is still broken. So let's pull that one out. So we can have a toggle ID string. I just move it up. Change that to case. And in here, it's going to be basically the same. Except it'll be on state. And the only difference is I now have to send the action of toggle. And if I run that, and we look at our log, so we can see everything coming through. So these are all the cities that we have. I can search. Let's see what I'm searching for. If I toggle, you can see what I toggled on or off. Yeah, so you just get like a full log of everything the user's been doing, which is very helpful for debugging. And if I delete one, it's also toggling. So yeah, everything continues working as it was originally. So the final one is refresh cities. So this one is actually using the new async await, because that's what refreshable uses. So I thought it might be nice to throw it in there. For some reason, this is the one that basically, while it's spinning, it's awaiting the result of something. So I don't know why they chose to use async await there, but nowhere else, but whatever. It's interesting. So I'm going to add a new refresh function like we've got here. So case refresh. I've dropped the cities just because we're already inside a cities action, so it's probably fine. Refresh is going to be very similar to fetch. So I'm just going to copy that one. And I've got a refresh, which literally just waits a second and a half, just for demonstration. And it's also going to call fetched, but there's a little bit of a difference here that if we already have cities, we don't want to just destroy them with whatever the new ones are, because we've got favorites in there. So what we want to do instead is if state.allCities is empty, set it, else probably just copy what we've got down here. Cool. So we've got a special method on the store, which allows us to async await on a particular action. So composable architecture's also got this. So I just parroted what they had basically, but it'll await until the state changes. So I'm going to pass in something that will be true, and as soon as it becomes false, it'll release this await, which means the spinner will go away. So it's effectively the same as what we've got here on the publisher. So this is a publisher, and I've just written a little wrapper that sort of, once it receives a value, it'll tell the continuation, which is what await uses to resume, and then that's the end of it. It releases the async. So we're going to do this exact same thing, but we are going to probably need some state here. So I'm going to do store.send, use that action that we had, and we need a condition here, like what something has to be true. So I'm going to say it's, considering it's called fetch in all the other cases, I'm going to call it is fetching and add that to our state. So when we fetch, we're going to have to set that to true. Same here. And when we successfully fetch, we want to reset it back to false. And that should handle our refresh functionality. So I can just pass the key path in. This is something Apple allows us to do now to functions. And I can delete this. And I also no longer need any of this or this. So if I run that now, so I can still do everything as I used to be able to, but the benefit is I can actually see what I'm doing in our log. Delete things, and if we wait a minute, there it goes. I can also pull to refresh, and we get our new ones back, and it maintains the list that I previously had. So that's kind of how it looks after refactoring it to Redux. So some of the benefits of this is we can test what happens when an action goes through the store. We know that it'll change the state in an expected way. We can also test with mock dependencies now, because they don't have to adhere to observed object or any associated types. They don't have that restriction, so we can pass in, like we could create a protocol for this now. And then create a mocked version of it. class. And then you can return just for test purposes. So yeah, we've enabled that functionality. We can also use this in our preview if we want. If we're hitting a real API, we could then just replace it, sorry, down here, with a environment. We can pass in our mock one. If I was to, whoops. And then we can pass in that mock. And if I refresh this, it should be empty. If it'll run. Able to build. Oh, right, I forgot to do it. Cool. So we can test just with like a few cities or whatever mocked ones. If we have like a real API over here. So this is effectively giving us what we would also need for our unit tests and snapshot tests and things like that. We can just mock them really easily. And finally, the other thing I'll talk about is, so this is a really simple example. We have like quite a simple app. There's not a lot of screens involved. So what happens when the app grows and we have, you know, a massive application that has many different pieces of functionality. So we may have city state. We may have this app state which drills down, this app action which drills down into multiple different actions, you know, for each part, each function of the app. So something we want to do is when we're creating a reducer, we don't really care that it belongs to app state, or we don't even care if it belongs to multiple pieces of state. All we care about is focusing on a particular piece. So the city state in this example and the city's action, those are the things we care about. So something composable architecture gives us is a thing called scoping. So it lets us focus in on that app action .cities. So we use that, we do that using key paths. So we could have something like app action .cities, and the key path for that on store.state, which I don't have access to right here, but I would be able to pass in the key path, and then it's actually going to let me do it. Looks of it, it's kind of weird. There is no store. I move it down, maybe here. Anyway, so it lets us cut the store up into little pieces, and we can then have views that only care about their particular piece of state. You can even do it on the dependencies. So you might only want to pass through a certain dependency to a particular view. You don't want to pass through every one, because then you have to mock everyone for the preview and the snapshots and things like that. So it allows us to do this thing called scoping. And then in order to go back, we also have to have a pullback, which is basically if we have a key path, Have state dot cities. We want to basically on the store we'd have state key path, and considering this is a writable key path, we can actually then set it to a new state. So that's basically what a pullback is doing internally. And this is one of the functionalities of composable architecture, and that allows us to work on really small pieces of code, really focused pieces of code, without having to delve into these higher levels of like app state, app action, and it can get really complicated when you have like very large apps. So that allows us to break down our app into very small pieces, composable pieces that individuals can work on in isolation. And then you have a pullback, so to bring it back into the app state level. There's also a thing called a case path, which, yeah, it's basically the same as a key path, except it's the forward one, and it does app action dot cities, for example, and it's just the same thing. It allows you to delve down deep into a particular action, so that'll be a cities action, and then with that, like case path, it's called, I can then just do case path, you know, refresh, for example. So that doesn't exist in this app, but that's something you can do. I do have an example of composable lined up, and I'm going to put it side by side and show you how little differences there are. So we've got city state, exactly the same as we've got over here. Sorry, cities actions, exactly the same. App environment, exactly the same. The reducer is basically the same. The only difference they have is that an effect is an actual object, which it adheres to publisher, I believe. Yeah, it's a publisher. So they've just got their own type. And it allows us to have a failure type in theirs as well. So if it throws it, we can log the error or do something funky with the error, catch it. Yeah, just handle things a bit better. So that's better for API, like real API calls. My one's very primitive. It's just always assumes you've already mapped it. So some of the other things that it gives us are the ability to just return, no, I don't have any effect, which over here is a bit nasty. The array is empty, whatever. And then over here, there's some sort of minor differences, but they improve performance like drastically. So I've got this environment object. So every time the store changes, every view in my application will update, which is not really what you want. You want it only to update when a particular piece of data changes. So they've invented this thing called a view store, which allows us to focus in on particular pieces of content. Yeah, so you pass in the store, you can remove duplicates of the state, and you can also, there's a thing called a local store, which allows us to basically scope the state. So if we don't want all of the app state, for example, we just want the city state, we can scope it and return a new store that only focuses on city state, and then the view store can use that store. But if you look at this code, it's basically identical in both versions. So I try to keep as close to their architecture as possible. It's annoying. Yeah, so very similar. They let you pass in animations into the store, which allows us to then test it because we can disable the animation or test that an animation was sent, but not actually execute it. So for testing purposes, that's really helpful. they've got this exact same, store binding, and the exact same refreshable. So yeah, I think I've basically covered off everything I wanted to talk about from that. Yeah, I might see if there's any questions, actually.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. That was, I'm sure that will make a lot of people's life a little bit easier as they develop their apps. We do have some questions. We have one for Grace, first of all. So I might hit that one off the top.
Yep.
First of all, it's it's a two-part question. What roles are open at Concentrix in the iOS space? And are there any opportunities for people in non-technical roles, for example, growth management?
Yeah, so good question, and thank you for whoever asked that. So I'll be absolutely upfront and honest. Recently we had a new BDM, business development manager, join the business, and he is too good at his job and making my job a bit more difficult. Looking for lots of iOS and Android developers always. We have a lot of new clients upcoming in the next few months. So whoever is keen, I pass my email over to Andrew, and absolutely feel free to reach out. And in terms of his second question, in terms of growth, other roles we have project managers, business analysts, design, UX design, UI design. I'm not sure if that answers the person's question.
Yeah, you can actually go over to the website. There's a careers, and then you can find the city, and these are all of the open roles we have.
Right, fantastic. I'll be sure to share that in the links, but both the video and on Facebook, so people can get a hold of that. Speaking of technical, you said you were looking for Android and iOS. One of the other questions we had was, and anyone can answer this, do you only make native, or do you use cross-platform like Flutter or React Native as well?
I can answer my recruitment side of things. Is at the moment we're iOS Android, but I know Flutter is definitely something we're looking into, and we are doing React Native as well. But I'll pass over to Chris because I'm sure he's more professional in this space.
Yeah, we do have React Native apps. I'm not sure about Flutter. I've not worked on a Flutter one, but yeah, we do have React Native.
Okay, great.
There is a project coming up where we're very seriously considering using Flutter. So watch this space, I guess, because we may be looking for some Flutter guns very soon.
Good to know. We'll make sure we've got quite a few Flutter people in this group, so I'm sure they'll be eager to hear that.
Cool.
Another question?
Might move on to the techie ones.
Yeah, for sure. There's one person asked a question about the copy functionality that you have there, which they've seen in Kotlin but have not seen in Swift.
So what copy functionality are you talking about?
I'm not sure. Sorry, that was just how the question came through. That's all right. We can move on to another one.
What is Compose? Yes, there is a link. I was going to share that on my next slide. So I've put together this, which contains the composable architecture version, a Redux version, and a vanilla, which is just SwiftUI. I haven't included any Mvvm, but I mean, it's a very small app, so it doesn't really need one. And this actually talks about composable architecture, and it links you to the tour. And the guys at pointfree.co are the ones who invented it. And they walk you through a very simple app and show how it progresses. They have quite a good video catalog around their framework as well. So it's highly recommended to go over there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Plug done.
The last question, are you considering using Kotlin multi-platform mobile as well?
It's something we have looked at in the past. I'm not sure. I think it would depend on the project. If there's a lot of like cross-platform stuff that we want to keep the same, yeah, that's kind of up to on a project by project basis, I think.
Right, gotcha. Sorry, we missed one. We missed one question as well. How do you manage multiple projects? If you use squads, how big is a squad?
Max, do you want to field that one maybe?
Yeah, sure. So we usually have a team per project. Teams can range in size from like a couple of developers with a PM, UX UI, and a BA to say like 6 or 7 developers, and then when it gets bigger than that, we usually split into squads within a project. So we may have multiple squads working on the same application, but we rarely have one squad across multiple apps at once, multiple projects at once. It's usually scoped to a project, and you see that through. Yeah, people move around a lot. So yeah, you can within a year work on 4 or 5 different projects, or just the one project. It's kind of up to you how you want to work. You just let your line manager know and your PM, and they'll take care of you.
Fantastic. Lots of flexibility. It's always appreciated in a workplace. Look, thanks very much, guys. Max just jumped in there, and Chris and Grace as well. We really appreciate your time and the talk. And for anyone else who is interested, all the links and information will be posted on in the show notes on the video, but also on the Facebook and the Twitter as well. So thanks very much, guys. We really appreciate your time tonight.